My path has been very non-linear. Worked for an investment bank for about a year, decided I never wanted to work for a bank ever again, then moved to Japan.
Where do you think your skills fit perfectly with leading a team like this?
Work on projects and not on tasks. You can never go too far in simplifying things.
What challenges did you face and how were they overcome?
In this episode of my podcast series, I'm joined by Stuart, a seasoned data expert with almost 2 decades of experience working with complex big data. He shares his journey navigating the ever-evolving landscape of data analytics, data science, and innovation. From pivotal moments in his career to practical advice on advancing your own data career, we've got lots of useful tips and advice coming up. Stuart and I discuss multiple real-life examples of data projects and the essential skills needed to land a data role and further down the line, lead a data team, so I'd strongly recommend making the time to watch the entire video podcast. But, of course, feel free to skip to the sections you think are most relevant to you using the timestamps. So, grab your favorite beverage, settle in, and get ready for some real-life applicable data and career talk.
Okay, everyone, so today's episode is going to be a special one because Stuart's here, my former colleague, and I've already introduced him. But we'll kick it off with a simple question, just to warm you up, if that's okay.
Of course, sounds good.
Perfect. So tell me a bit about yourself. What was your path to becoming the head of innovation for a bank within the financial services industry? How did working with data play a pivotal role in your career?
Sure. I mean, I guess one thing I'd reflect first is my path has been very non-linear. Yeah. So I started working after almost like a false start to my career where I worked for an investment bank for about a year, decided I never wanted to work for a bank ever again, then moved to Japan for 3 years. And when I came back from there back to Scotland, within about 2 weeks, I was working for a very big bank. This was back in 2007. And my first job was in credit risk. And so basically, this was during the credit crisis. So my job was creating graphs that tended to go up and up and up, reflecting like the state that financial services in there, banks were losing more and more on credit risk at the time. That was obviously a really exciting time, very noisy time to start in banking, very disrupted times. I got the chance to get involved in all kinds of things I might not have otherwise get to get involved in, projects, different changes, regulators, very involved in the future of the banking industry. So I got to move around strategic, analytical, data-centric roles. Gradually found a rhythm where I got involved in more strategic projects for quite a while. Transformation, digital transformation often and that kind of thing. And sort of worked my way around risk types as well. So I started in credit risk, which is the risk of people not paying you back if you lend them money, but also into the risk of tech breaking or the risk of not meeting regulations and that kind of thing as well, financial crime, fraud. So got exposed to an awful lot of different things. Then I guess I was given the chance to do something a bit different. The risk function decided it wanted to have an innovation team and asked if there were any volunteers to help set it up. I was lucky enough to be given the opportunity, and it just gave me a license to start exploring everything, both really understanding the nature of the problems the banks faced, as well as all this tech and all this new solutions that were out there as well. So, understanding the sort of demand, the sort of challenges, as well as the supply, what are the potential solutions we have in the world there to solve it. So I was learning about things like quantum computing, about cloud, about AI, blockchain, everything, just to understand this new emerging space of financial services. And I found that really addictive. And I think for the past, 5-6 years, I've been more and more involved in that, working on more and more interesting projects with more and more interesting people and getting the chance to just make an impact really and leverage value from some of this new tech.
I see. So I worked in risk myself as well. Yeah. And I know that there's so much data that you can work with within risk. So would you say that starting off your career specifically within credit risk has helped you a lot over your career because you had to deal with so much big data and complex data?
Absolutely. So risk is quite often divided into financial and non-financial risk. And the first one is much more numbersy. There's loads more data. If you think about balances, you think about payments, you think about understanding customer demographics and what sort of drives them and what they need. It's a very, very data-rich risk sort of domain to be in. So yeah, absolutely. And I guess there's a lot of demand for just not just understanding the current state, but also making predictions about the future. So then you get into, well, what are the best methodologies or tools to help us do that? So absolutely, I think it definitely created a bit of an underlying discipline, and from there you get acquainted with all the tools you need, right? You understand your Microsoft Excel for a start, but then into more advanced sort of analytical platforms, visualization tools, and all that kind of thing, which you can then bring into other domains, which don't think of themselves as quantitative, but absolutely can be. You can absolutely approach even things like compliance and regulation with a similar eye and try to think of them in a quantitative sense sometimes.
I mean, we're going to dive into all of these topics later on. So Stuart was throwing out some big words like AI, machine learning, all these kind of topics we will dive into later in the episode. But I guess for now, I'm going to move on to question 2. And I thought this was a nice question just to break the ice.
Sure.
So in the world of big data, if you could have access to one super specific data point about your own life, what would it be and how would you use that information?
I absolutely love this question. So this reminds me, when I was young, I used to play a lot of video games. And I sort of imagined that when you die, you get this game over screen, and suddenly you get all this data about your life and all these things you never got the chance to just know fully while you were living. Which girls had a crush on you, how many steps you took that day, all this stuff that you could never have the time to measure or the access to measure. Now, I don't think like that. I think there's definitely a trade-off between knowing too much about a problem and being overly analytical. However, I think this is a really interesting question. I guess my answer might be, it would be really cool for me to know how many people I'd helped that day, or the impact I'd made on a particular project in a sort of non-tangible sense. I think I think it would just be really representative of the kind of thing I'm into. I love adding value. I love solving problems in banks and other companies, but you don't always know the impact you've had. So I think knowing that would be really, really useful to me and really motivate me. I do reflect, though, there's this thing in data called Goodhart's law, which is as soon as you start to measure something, it stops being as valuable. So basically people game the system to optimize that metric. And I would hope that this didn't happen with how many people had helped that day. But, the idea is that I start to help people in really trite or trivial ways. And but that would be my answer, I think. Do you have an answer to that question, by the way, Mo?
I don't actually, because I didn't really think about it. But I guess if I had a super specific data point right now that I would want to see is a data point on why people are watching this specific channel. I think this is something that I would be interested in, because YouTube is a big passion of mine and I'm not going to go down this rabbit hole. So I'm just going to move on to question 3, because this podcast is clearly about Stuart and his experiences and how we can learn from Stuart's extensive career working with data and what we can, gain from it, what kind of insights he has to offer to us in terms of skills, experience, and knowledge. So given your experience working with big data, do you have any advice for people who are just getting started or thinking about getting started, or for people who already have some experience and maybe they're just looking for their next data role to further their career?
Yeah, so it's a really good question. And I was reflecting on the way here, actually, just, if I could go back, what kind of things would I do early doors to help me jumpstart and get moving quicker? The first thing I'd say is that everything I'm about to say here may or may not apply to you, right? I think there's advice is probably useful for someone, but rarely be useful for everyone, right? And I think that's probably the most important thing, is to reflect on yourself and your own experience and really understand what makes you tick, which environments you thrive in, and just understand what makes you work. But I will give a few things that I think should apply to quite a broad range of people. The first is be aggressive in finding yourself sponsors and champions in the organization you work for or beyond it. I think everyone talks about networking, but it's a bit beyond that. It's a bit deeper. You want people that are in your court and your corner, won't always agree with you, but will actually give you really good intellectual challenge on where you are and what you're doing. And it could be about a specific task. It could be about your more intangible development. It could be about soft skills. It could be anything. But I've found that those kind of champions are vital for progression, both in an organization and moving outside it as well. So that'd be the first thing. The second thing I'd say is that try your best to work on projects and not on tasks, right? This is a strange way. I'll unpack that a little bit. But basically what I mean there is really trying to understand the why of what you're doing. So rather than, I need you to do this report, I need you to build this model, is try to understand the wider solution, or you're trying to develop, or the problem ideally that you're trying to solve. Understand what an impact looks like there and what value would look like for the organization or the company. I think then you'll start to ask bigger and bigger questions that'll make it much easier for you to progress and sell your work better. So I think that's a really important one.
Just on this point, I guess, I totally agree with you, because a lot of people come to me on this channel and just at work as well, and they ask me, how do I do this in Tableau or Excel or Python, or how do I code this in SQL? But what they don't see is, why are you doing this? Like, why am I even doing this? I have no idea. So when I talk about technical skills and why I think technical skills will not be the thing that take you to the next level in your career, it's because you just need to meet a certain threshold. Like for me, for example, I know that I can solve basically any technical problem because I'm confident in my technical skills. So what I focus on is more so, I ask my business stakeholders what you actually want from me, and we'll make it happen. So I don't have to think about, oh, how do I do this in Excel? Because I just know I'll be able to do it. Just tell me your business requirements and we'll build something that truly adds value, rather than focusing too much on, what code I should use. I know I can do that. So the moment you get good enough with your technical skills to focus on the business problem rather than on how to solve this technical problem, because solving that specific technical problem, writing the right code or writing the right formula, it doesn't actually get you to solve the business problem.
That's
right?
it. Yeah, and often the business may or may not know the problem, right? They may have jumped straight to a solution without fully appreciating the possibilities that are out there. And actually, a good data analyst, a good data scientist will be able to sit down with that team, develop a relationship, and almost have a bit of a back and forth. And it shouldn't be about, boom, here's a list of things we think we need, here's our specifications, constraints, and requirements, deliver them. It should actually be much more iterative dialogue type of approach. I think those work so well, especially when it's quite exploratory. It's a more complex domain where you're not necessarily sure you can nail the answer. We just with a big long list of requirements, if that makes sense.
It sounds like from your experience that you've worked and managed and headed up teams with both very technical people and very non-technical people. How hard did you find it to communicate the same thing towards very different audiences?
Yeah, so I think you can never go too far in simplifying things. And actually, like if you can't explain something to a 5-year-old, maybe you don't understand it that well. And actually, it's a really good discipline, having kids myself, to be able to just sound them off on things that I'm doing, to try to understand and unpick it in that kind of language. And this is not like patronizing people. It's actually just making sure they understand things. It's also like, a lot of the time you'll have data specialists that might not understand the tech they're using. You might have tech people that don't understand the business problem. The business problems don't understand. Business people don't understand the data. So bringing people together and actually just being open and honest about, here's what I bring to the table, here's how it works in kind of basic language, kind of elevates everybody's understanding from the different sort of dimensions of the problem. So I think that's a really important one. I've always found that those kind of interdisciplinary teams of people that bring something unique to the table can achieve way more than you'd expect. Like, rather than a team of 5 or 6 very identical, similar skill set analysts, actually a more diverse group of people can achieve much more.
So again, I have to totally agree with Stuart, because you guys know that on my channel, I bang on about how one of my greatest assets, well, what I consider one of my greatest assets, is the ability to connect both technical and non-technical audiences, because you have to tailor your message to your audience. When you explain something, it's not about showing how much you know, but putting the content in a way for my people to digest it in the simplest way possible, for my audience to be able to understand, interpret, and then maybe have some actions on the back of it as quick as possible, as efficiently as possible.
This is a random anecdote, but it's triggered a thought, right? So I remember, this is going back a while, that it was a really important legal case that involved text messaging, and Supreme Court justices were opining on it, and none of them knew how text messaging worked, right? So they were asking incredibly basic questions about SMS. Can everyone read the message when I send it? Just because they didn't understand the fundamentals of this technology, which obviously, 30 years on, we can look back and laugh, but there's nothing wrong with asking questions like that. And actually, you need to be prepared to answer questions at that level. Now, I'm not saying your execs are the same, but there will be things they are completely blindsided on, they do not have any knowledge on, and it may well be data, because it's quite a niche subject in a lot of organizations. So actually bringing quite basic accounts to the table is really important. As you say, I think you described what I call a translator, someone whose role in the team is actually to work with specialists and non-specialists and get them, working together efficiently. And that's, super important role. Yeah, absolutely. That was the second piece of advice. I do have one more that I thought of as well, is that, and it kind of relates, is that I think being really conscious and mindful of the way you package your work is so important too. Like intellectual humility, like here's how I've approached the problem, here's how I've written it up, and being really evidence-based and trying to think about everything you're doing is something that could be discovered by somebody in the future so they don't have to do the same thing again. If you're working on a report and you do it twice, automate it so you don't have to do it again. If you're doing a piece of analysis and it didn't work, write that up so someone else doesn't do that again in 2 months' time to arrive at the same conclusion. So I think that kind of thing, you can add a lot of value just by packaging what you're doing in a slightly different way sometimes.
And learning from your mistakes, right? If something goes south, it's okay. As long as you learn from it, you become a bit better and you move on.
Yeah, absolutely. But more than that is that when you learn, make sure you're presenting a route for other people to learn the same thing as well. So if I've discovered, this didn't work, experiment failed, write that up as a failed experiment. That's something that the organization doesn't have to do again. You're saving them money in the future if you capture that properly too.
Fantastic point. So just to sum it up, Stuart mentioned sponsors. So make sure you find someone who can really mentor you and give you something above and beyond, mere advice on technical skills. Someone who can really guide your career and give you some value add, some insights into what a career in data actually, looks like. And maybe Stuart could be your person. Who knows?
Yeah. You know where I am now?
Well, yeah, he could be. And then your second point was to simplify, right? Simplify your messaging, make sure you tailor your message to your audience. And then the third point was around packaging your work. And I think this goes with really anything you do at work, I would say, because, for example, what is it? So, yeah, one of the things I really do not enjoy at work is when people send me a very long email. It's got no spacing, no nothing in between. It's just a huge paragraph, right? That's just badly packaged to me, for example. That's just one of those things that you should have taken the time, at least break it up a little bit for me to easily understand what you're saying. And then it goes with something like a Tableau dashboard as well, for example. If you do some amazing data analysis, you've already extracted the data, you did your analysis, cleaned your data, transformed your data. But if the end product, the visuals don't look good, then your packaging is not good. And then you cannot sell your idea, you cannot sell your product. And I always bring it back to Apple, for example. So I know that Apple products are really expensive, partly because they are really good, but partly because their marketing is just insane. I just think to create such brand loyalty, it just mesmerizes me every single time how people get locked into the Apple ecosystem. And I switched from Android actually to Apple a couple years ago when I would say 18 months ago when I started my YouTube channel. And now I'm locked in. I even use Safari instead of Chrome now. Yeah. Just because my passwords are stored with Apple now, and it's just simple.
It's a fantastic example. I think I'm sure I remember some kind of internet meme type image of the Apple interface versus what you typically see when you work in an office as an interface, which is just all those clickers, buttons, everything, and actually thinking about things from a more user-centric perspective, thinking about your customers, like what is the equivalent from what you're producing from that Apple experience? Presumably it's something about helping them get to the answers they need faster, which you can only do if you understand the problem, you understand the data, and you've done a bit of work in understanding what the solutions might be as well.
Yeah. Perfect. Okay. Let's, I think, move on to the next question because we've received a bunch of good advice. So in your role as the head of innovation for a bank, can you share a specific example of a tech and data forward project you led that significantly impacted the organization's approach to managing risk? What challenges did you face and how were they overcome?
Yeah, so I've worked a lot in credit, which I mentioned before is like, we're going to lend you money. Are you a good bet or not, right? Are you going to pay back, a loan? You need to know enough about the counterparty so that they're going to give you some money back in the future, you hope, with interest, right? That's how banks make money, right? So I guess there's a whole science that goes into understanding that. Now, I've been involved in lots of projects looking at different stages. They're onboarding, in life, understanding things, trying to figure out if someone might stop paying you back in the near future, like something might change at a sort of customer level. And so I guess I went through an exercise. As part of innovation, you understand the problems, right? So working with the business, understanding who was looking for what kind of solutions to what kind of problems, and found that, understanding like an early warning indicator that someone may not pay you back in the future. What can we do? And actually, this was an organization that wasn't particularly up the ladder in terms of maturity with data. Certainly wouldn't be like leading the pack in terms of using AI and that kind of thing. But I just saw an opportunity there to do something with some of these new modeling techniques or newish modeling techniques, using the data we had already. So it's kind of the equivalent of like making a meal with what you have in the cupboard. We didn't have to go out to the market for it. I thought there was enough there that we could have a go. And we had a great team of like data engineers, scientists, and people who could help with the innovation side as well. So we kind of went through bringing that group together with the business, make sure they're on the journey as well, and kind of working that through. So I think that's a really good example of you're using rich customer data, understanding a real business problem. It's a real financial problem, the real prize at the end of it, and not having to reinvent the wheel. We can use data that we already have at hand. At the same time, it's actually taking quite a few steps all at once for the organization. So using new tech, new data in a new way, and bringing together a new group of people. So that's I think a really good example of a kind of data problem that you work on, and it's one that using things like machine learning. So using these kind of new algorithmic approaches to mining data, we could develop a solution to that problem really quickly, and add tangible value for the business.
When you say rich customer data, what kind of customer data points are you referring to that say, I would say, were the most impactful or most significant in terms of determining who's going to pay you back or who's not going to pay you back?
Yeah, so I guess there's a wide opportunity. Like the banks have access to lots of different pockets of data. So you may have data associated with the credit bureaus. So they collect a lot of data on customers and understand, their financials, their payments, potentially what they spend their money on. They would have their own kind of credit ratings for the companies as well. There may also be, if you have current accounts, if you provide current accounts, you would understand the behaviors of your customers there. You may know at like an account level if they've stopped paying you back before, what kind of risk buckets might they be in. So there's all kinds of different data you use: customer data, behavioral data, shared sort of bureau data. You could even use sectoral data if it was around businesses and things to sort of drill in. So basically what we did is we started off by looking at everything, because this is the world we're in now, where you don't have to say, let's just pick 5 variables that kind of make sense to us and just start there. We can actually look quite broadly and mine it a little bit. And so we found that there were some good signals that you could get from just understanding the kind of things that customers might do when they want to get their house in order or wanted to raise a bit more money. So as an example, if you're dealing with a business, if you know that they're applying for loans all over the place in other companies, it could be a sign that they may be struggling for capital or looking for cash. It might not be, there may be good reasons, but it may be a risk indicator. So that's one example.
Where do you think your skills fit perfectly with leading a team like this? Because from the sounds of it, there's a lot of data. And if you could give an indication as to how much data that is, that would be great. But I guess, in terms of connecting all these very technical bits to the non-technical bits and to the bits where you actually need deep banking knowledge to understand how loans work, how interest rates work, the basic things, how mortgages work, how remortgaging works. How do you think your skills fit in to lead a team like this?
So I guess it helps that I'm quite interdisciplinary, right? So I know enough to be dangerous about innovation, enough to be dangerous about credit risk, enough to be dangerous about data science and modeling. So I can work with people who are true experts in those different areas and get them working together and collaborating. I can also lean in and help with different parts in there too. So I think there's that piece about just having an overview of how the whole thing works together. But actually, with this, you can be a bit utilitarian. You can be a bit, we don't know which data points are going to work. We understand the variable, we missed payment, yes, no. And we can work back using the data to understand what changed or what happened at a customer level before then. So you strip it down to, it's a really simple data problem in its essence. You've got an outcome variable. You've got some potential predictive variables. Let's just test them. We can have our intuitions about what may or may not work, and we'll absolutely have to make sure that the variables we end up with make sense and that we can use them and all that, the regulation that goes around that. But what we can do is we can leave a little bit to the algorithm to help us out here too, right? We can see, well, which variables end up as most predictive, and are we okay with them going into the model?
So in terms of data, just to give an indication, because you used to work for a large bank. I still work for this bank. But how much data is it we're talking about? Just generally, I guess, within the financial services industry, specifically, I guess, within credit risk. Because if I just think of, right, my current account transactions, my savings account transactions, my credit card transactions, my mortgage transactions. It can literally be anything, right?
Yeah. So, and it gets even more complicated when you think about transactions. So it's not just that I spent £10 yesterday. It's the specific merchant I spent money in. It's where they're located. It's everything about them as well. If I'm a company, it's about understanding all my suppliers, and that's a whole network that springs up. So, I mean, to answer your question, if you looked at the credit bureaus, they'd offer you thousands of fields on individual customers. They collect an awful lot of data. If you have a relationship banking model, you'll collect, without even trying, like lots of data points again, and even thousands plus. If you go dig into transactional data, that's a rabbit hole, and you could end up with a lot more data there. And then that's a row for each customer. So it can end up being very, very large data sets without breaking a sweat, really, without trying.
What are some methods you use to filter out the noise? Because it sounds like I could be potentially looking at thousands of columns, thousands of fields. So how do you make sure that you go after the most impactful ones?
Yeah, so I guess the first thing we would do is, before this even becomes a data science challenge, is you sit down and you really understand the problem. You kind of understand if say you're looking at something like a missed payment, or you're looking at a fraud case, you look at existing fraud cases and maybe unpick them a bit, see if the data we've got, what flashes up there, as a warning sign. You speak to experts because they've seen it all. People who handle, say, bad debt cases or cases where customers have struggled, they'll have lots of insight that they'll happily share. If you're there to help them. So that would be starts. You could also speak to third parties, understanding debt charities and things like that may have good insight into customers and the kind of customers you want to be helping in that space too. So I think there's lots of different avenues you could choose to look at. So I think broadly though, the kind of generalizable advice there would be speak to experts and maybe do some light touch analysis on the data first to kind of just get a feel for it. So that those would be the first things you could do to crunch it down a little bit. But I mean, I think more and more now we have the luxury of being able to throw a few extra variables into models like this because you tend to have much more compute than you've had in the past. I remember credit card companies in the 90s having to do a lot of this not quite by hand, but not pretty much by hand, and mining the data for this. But now you can really get through lots of these fields pretty quickly.
So I think this just goes back to the point that you mentioned before, that it's not just about the technical skills, right? Domain knowledge matters, and it matters so much, especially the further you get into your career. It's what's going to separate you from the rest, right? Because just because you can do some data things and you have some data skills, as in core technical skills, anybody can technically do that, in my opinion. Like you could always find the next coder, the next software developer, but to really understand how financial markets work and to gain that deep subject matter expert knowledge, you would have to work in the industry and you would have to put in the hours understanding the problem and then applying your skills to actually go and solve those problems. So honestly, this is one big takeaway for you guys. And I always say this, is that whenever you do projects or anything you do, just think about the whys and think about the benefit of you doing this. Like, what are you actually going to do? Just because you create something or just because you write a line of code, in my opinion, it doesn't mean anything if you're not solving something at the end of the day.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think, you have to recognize that the only way you're going to make that project into something you can take with you and prove as an experience is to understand the value it's going to create for the business. So I think it's for your own sake as much as solving the problem better. But I think I go back to it that the way you choose to deliver a data science project isn't fixed. You can make it something that's quite collaborative with the business. You can be checking in with them every day. Say, here's what I'm doing today. Here's what I was thinking. Have you ever come across this data being useful in this kind of problem? And just spinning ideas on each other, keeping it like less formal and kind of higher touch, I think is quite a useful way to approach it too.
Speaking of science, actually, I know you just completed your master's degree in behavioral science. So I'm going to ask you a couple questions about that, if that's okay.
Yeah.
So how do you integrate insights from this field, as in behavioral science, into your innovation strategies, particularly when dealing with data and machine learning or even AI within the financial services industry?
Yeah. So honestly, my answer to that is I integrate it everywhere. So I've been interested in the subject of behavioral science for more than 10 years now. So one of the financial regulators in the UK got, as well as lots of other regulators, got into using behavioral science to inform their policy and their rules, basically, for banks. Basically, there's this quote there's a marketing guy called David Ogilvy that said people don't think what they feel, they don't say what they think, and they don't do what they say. So basically, if you think about intention, you think about behavior, you think about opinion, these are all things that sort of overlap sometimes and float around, but aren't always the same thing. So I think that can apply at loads of different levels. So if I think about whether or not projects succeed in banks, often will just come down to whether or not your stakeholders get it and are on board and bought in and feel part of it. So actually, that's nothing to do with how good the project is. That's just a human emotional thing. It's a behavioral problem as much as anything else. Whether your team gels and works well together, it's going to be more behavioral than everyone doing a good job sometimes and bringing it to the table. So those are just two very, very simple examples of how it fits in. I mean, the area I'm most interested in right now is that kind of intersection between human decision making and using AI for decisions more and more. We quite often put human decision making on a pedestal and are really skeptical about automated decision making. But actually, we know that humans regularly will be quite biased in their decision making or quite noisy. They make different decisions at different times depending on when you ask them. Whereas a lot of technological solutions don't do that. So I'm really interested in the way we feel about AI, the way that AI can complement what we do. And I think that's a really rich area as well to look at.
Have you read the book by Daniel Kahneman by any chance, Thinking Fast and Slow?
Yeah, so that was probably my jumping off point for the whole subject, because I think it really got me into it, it's an absolutely incredible read. I think I drop examples from that all the time in terms of takeaways for data, for sure.
So it's interesting because it was one of my syllabus books when I was doing my master's quite a while ago now. I feel a bit old. Yeah, it was 5-6 years ago, and I read this book. It's called Daniel Kahneman, Thinking Fast and Slow. I'll put it in the description below. But essentially, it was a behavioral finance book for me. And it taught me, I think, 99% of what I should know about investing and how people are irrational. So say, for example, stock markets, when people announce something, the stock, no matter how good or bad the announcement, you'll see a relatively large movement. Why? It's because people either expect it better or worse. And then you see it kind of just adjust. So if the stock price goes really high, increases by 20% over the next 5 days, it'll slowly come down. And there was another interesting point where basically he had facts and data to prove this. But it was saying that most buy and hold investors make more money than the people who trade actively. So it's highly likely that if you buy some stocks today and you forget about them, and then you're in 5 years, you're like, oh, I bought some stocks, you're going to be doing better than Stuart and I sitting here day trading. Because it's just the way it works is that I think risk and reward. The higher the risk, the higher the reward. The lower the risk, the lower the reward. If that's not the case, then there's some inequality in the financial markets. And then, someone would step in and buy up everything or sell everything. But from this book, honestly, you just read it. You know that I love personal finance and it's really close to my heart. And if you just read this one book, you'll learn so much. Say, for example, herding behavior.
Yeah, so that's massive. So I think you described an example of herding in investment. You see that as well with NFTs. You see this, they're quite literally, they're quite often the attraction is the novelty and the fact that other people are buying these things. Sometimes you see, so these kind of things play up again and again. That it's difficult sometimes to tie back investment to intrinsic value of the asset sometimes, and the NFTs are a really good example of that. You have to believe, you have to really be quite bought in a way. So these are really important themes, and I think sometimes being aware of them isn't enough to overcome them. But seeing them in other people can sometimes be really useful, and it's one of these reasons why sharing your thinking and being really transparent is so important, because very difficult to de-bias yourself just by understanding that biases exist, but other people can help you with that, and writing things down and documenting things can help you with that as well.
So now that you have a master's in behavioral science, why do you think people don't believe in numbers and data, and investors, for example, just do the complete opposite of a rational decision? Like it just does not make sense sometimes what people do, right? Like say, for example, if you see 99 people selling, you'll do the same, right?
Yeah.
You're just going to be like, this is the right choice. I need to do the same without even thinking about your own thoughts, your own decisions.
Well, yeah, I mean, there'd be different schools of thought in that, right? So if you really need to get in, again, it's kind of like understanding the problem, right? You need to get into the individual making the decision there. What is driving them sitting in their office with their boss breathing down their neck about what they're going to do about this problem, driving them to make that decision? And sometimes, if the market's doing it, that's a defense in itself. There's less risk than if you hold and incur further loss than if you do the same thing that everyone else is doing. At least you're going to be in the pack. There's lots, and I'm not saying it's rational, but it almost makes sense from an individual perspective to understand that behavior at that level.
So this goes back to risk aversion or loss aversion then, sort of.
Potentially. I mean, it can be the fact that, I'm trying to think of an example. So,
sorry, before, let me just step in here. So risk or loss aversion, let me explain it in the simplest way I know. The sadness you get from losing $5 is a lot more than the happiness you get from gaining $5. And that's basically what risk aversion is. If you lose something, you'll be so much more sadder than actually gaining the same amount.
Absolutely. And there's lots of interesting interest in this, in whether or not there's a rational basis. If you go back to our, evolutionary roots, avoiding things that could kill us, it's probably more important than, getting into things that wouldn't, right? So there's this thing where lost states are probably more exciting and relevant to our brains, so they stick and we remember them more. So there could be a lot of rationality, if you like, at an individual level, even though the collective behavior doesn't make sense from that kind of purist economic perspective. And that's one of the interesting things about it, that it's sometimes not as simple as human brain's bad. It's sometimes like lots to unpack here. But I think it's a great one for data science, because you think about how you approach a problem probably has equal parts human dimension to data problem. And actually, you need to take things up to that level where you can sell things in human dimensions as well as just understanding the most predictive variables and whatnot.
All right, so Stuart and I just took a little coffee break and we're back with another question. So, the financial services industry is highly regulated. How do you navigate regulatory challenges while driving innovation, especially in projects involving cutting-edge technologies like machine learning or AI, and projects with lots and lots of data?
Yeah, it's a really good question, a really important question that will never go away in financial services. So I think my background in risk has given me quite healthy respect and appreciation for just the range of regulation, the kind of questions you need to ask at what kind of times in sort of innovation or data projects. I guess the short answer is there's quite well-known regulation now around data, and you really got to start with understanding that in terms of what you're going to be using. I think as well, though, I've been involved in a lot of projects to actually deliver regulatory change too, and the regulator doesn't want to inhibit use of AI. It just wants you to ask the right kind of questions, the right kind of things when you're using like data for customers, and make sure you're using for good purposes. I think for me, I've always tried to pick projects where the interests of the company broadly align with the interests of the customer. It's one of the reasons why like anti-fraud projects are good, because you kind of want the same thing as the customer wants and things. So it's quite a good use case, and you can almost do things you might not have done in other domains there, because there's quite a sort of positive outcome that everybody sort of wins from. But yeah, there's lots of regulation around models, data, security, and you need to make sure you have really good appreciation for that. I'd like to think the risk functions these days that I've worked in for a long time don't want to slow down innovation, are happy to be part and answer questions and get involved quite early in projects. So I think one of the key things is finding the right panel of experts that can help you navigate, tricky use cases there. I think as well, you really have to understand your bank's appetite. It doesn't want to be taking risks with new technology and trying things. Is that part of its identity, or is it a fast follower? Or is it, just going to wait until something's much more mature before we even, stick a toe in the water type of thing? So I think understanding the kind of culture of the company you work for is super important too, because that is not regulation, but it will drive the policy that sort of sits around that.
With regards to new technology, so you've worked for a very big organization and you've worked for smaller organizations as well. Do you notice a difference as to how receptive people are of these new technologies? Like maybe you think of larger organizations, they're a bit more traditional and they're a bit more like, okay, let's test it first. And then smaller places, startups, they're like, oh yeah, let's do it.
I think for organizations that have digital as part of their founding identity, they have certainly a much healthier appreciation for digital first and use of data. I think it depends probably less about the size of the organization, but more about the kind of culture and the backgrounds of a lot of the leaders, to be honest. It's again, it's maybe a behavioral thing, right? So it's that if people don't know the tech, if they're not data backgrounds, then you're going to have to bring them on a journey, and that's going to slow things down, and that's okay, because that's the pace the organization can go in that kind of area. So I think it's one of those things that it's almost you need to be super mindful of the maturity of the tech, the maturity of the people you're working with in the business, or the leaders you're working with, and how ready the data is too. So younger organizations aren't going to have rich data to build things on, so you're not going to end up with as robust, models and that kind of thing in the background. You're going to have your sort of Power BI dashboards that go back 3 months and that's it, because so it's a different framework. Obviously, when you're doing things for the first time in sort of a startup environment, you have the opportunity to really do things in a much more sophisticated way from day one. But beyond that, it's probably less to do with the sort of physics of the organization and more to do with the people that are running and leading it and their backgrounds and preferences. And it's why, people talk about, culture, eating strategy for breakfast. A lot of it does come down to the knowledge and the appetite for the people that work there.
That's surprising to hear, for me at least, definitely, because I always thought, I've only worked for one organization really, so I've been working for different legal entities, but the same parent company ever since I started working. And it's a huge, well, not a huge organization, but we have about 50,000-ish employees, so it's big enough, I guess. And I always thought that startups will be innovative and they'll take on anything, and big organizations, because things move slow, they'll always be like, okay, let's just, take it slower. Let's be risk averse. Just make sure that everything works, which makes sense because you have so much to lose, right? Yep. Especially within the financial services industry, you're under so much regulation that some players in the industry don't even want to join. I'm a firm believer that if Amazon thought it would be worth it to be a bank, they'd be a bank, 100%. But I don't think they think it's worth it because of the regulations and everything they would have to pay, especially taxes as well. They would have to probably start paying some form of taxes, which actually brings me on to one of my pet peeves, really, and I want to ask you your opinion around this, is that financial services companies are so heavily scrutinized for fraud. So say, for example, if I go on Facebook Marketplace and I'm trying to sell something and then I get scammed, then the banks are going to get sued, right? But Facebook, nothing is happening to Facebook or Meta at the end of the day. And all of these social media platforms where you put on something for sale, someone scams you, you get scammed, and then it's always the bank's fault. But the banks I know, at least the bank I work for, we have good fraud detection systems and we follow up and we care about our customers. But social media companies, they don't care at all. And their revenues are way higher than whatever revenue, these banks will be making.
Yeah, it's very timely. Obviously, we've read the news about Meta with, just one summons and a bit of a grilling on their marketplace has resulted in like a double-digit % of ads being removed and things for spurious fraudulent products and that kind of thing. So absolutely. Big tech is in a very interesting place, put it mildly, with regards to regulation. I think the next sort of 5 to 10 years are going to be a real defining era, I think, for big tech and how that evolves in the future. You have companies there that are just part of our day-to-day without really any form of competition. There is no other Google, there is no other Meta. Really, you use these things for very niche services that aren't really competed with. So that's got to be recognized, and the sheer reach of them puts them in incredibly powerful positions for however they choose to pivot. I couldn't agree more.
So I know for a fact that tech and data projects can be sometimes, or maybe all the times, like roller coasters. So can you share with us a project experience that felt like a thrilling ride, full of ups and downs, and how did the team celebrate the successful completion of this project? Or if you failed, what have you learned from these mistakes?
Yeah, so this goes back a bit. This is actually quite a few years ago, but I was lucky enough to be involved in a project in a very large organization that was building a very sophisticated loss simulation model. So the bank had lots of different parts of the group, worked in lots of different with lots of different asset classes, and basically built what's called a sort of simulation model to figure out how that very diverse portfolio would perform in different sort of economic levels of stress. This is using something called Monte Carlo simulation, which to sort of break it down for the listeners, I think of it as just rolling a whole bunch of dice 1,000,000 times and seeing what the distribution of those scores look like. So as an example, if you have two different asset classes which don't correlate very much with one another, even in extreme stress, if they're going to not lose at the same time, you have less risk in the book in aggregate because they perform in a sort of uncorrelated way. So the idea is that you get a much better, richer recognition of the diversification and can reward the diversification of your portfolio by using these kind of models. Now, the reason I mention it is because it was a huge learning experience for me. It was much more complicated than any other model I've been involved with previously. Huge amount of data from corners of the bank that I'd never come across before. So I had to sort of develop my understanding there. And I worked specifically in a corner of the organization, sort of retail bank, so kind of normal personal lending, mortgages, savings accounts, that kind of thing for personal customers. It just wasn't used to these kind of simulation models. They're more common in investment banks. You quite often see, like, you might put a value at risk models and things. Quite often we use simulation types of approaches. Now this was breaking new ground for me, so I had to upskill on. That was the sort of first roadblock. But then it was actually having to go through that journey with every single decision maker in that corner of the bank that ultimately this may become a performance metric for them. So that was a real roller coaster. And I guess working with my kind of counterpoints in other corners of the bank, so the sort of business banking equivalent, or the one of our sort of subunits in the States or over in Ireland, just understanding how they were getting on, and you developed this really strong sense of camaraderie and shared challenge, which was really sort of positive. And because we're all in different offices, we very rarely saw each other. So it wasn't until the end where you delivered this and you'd worked through all these difficult stakeholders where you sort of come together as a project team and really felt you'd achieved something that wasn't there before, existed for the bank.
When working on a project like this, what did you find more difficult? To try and get the non-technical content across to the technical people, or try and explain the technical content to the non-technical people, or both?
So it was definitely, for me personally, I had to spend the vast majority of my time on the latter. So really just trying to break down that technical stuff and explain it to a non-technical audience. So I remember, you do your breaking down, like on a page, explain like I'm five version of these sort of simulation models and the kind of challenges that they throw up. I think as well, I didn't sell it as a solution to every problem. I was really clear on what it could and couldn't do, where it was useful and where it wasn't, the kind of questions it was good at answering and the kind of questions it wasn't. So I think that kind of, intellectually honest approach, not trying to sell it as, panacea to all your problems, and just, here's where I think it might fit in. What do you think? And getting a bit of a dialogue going.
Did you come across people, techie people, as in, data scientists, data engineers, or data analysts, who were so smart, like genius territory, that they couldn't explain what they were doing to you at all because they saw the world, in a different way? So yeah, I mean, within that project, yes, but I mean, in my time, like you definitely find people that just come at problems from such a different way than you come towards them from. So, but I quite like that. I'm always quite attracted to people that just see the world in a different way and just have like this just completely different take on things. And I guess for that, you need to invest the time. You need to develop, your own like sort of shared understanding of how this works. Develop empathy with the way they see it. I find very, very rarely are people like that wrong. Just not understood. People don't have the time to listen to them and have it broken down. Obviously, it'd be great if you could wave a magic wand and have everyone be expert communicators. But if they were, they probably wouldn't be as good at the tech side, to be honest. They may also just enjoy working in a specialist sort of sphere. So I think as well, like just trying to get on the same side and understand the why of what we're doing and that we're all working together, and that ultimately selling this stuff, but my role in trying to break this down for people is going to help them succeed in getting even more rich data challenges in the future. I think is a really important thing too. So you were able to kind of gel with the technical and non-technical people because you were able to enable their skills, and you were able to provide something that they didn't have, and you complemented their skills very well.
Yeah,
right?
I mean, I think I tend to be, when I'm in a technical team, I tend to be the least technical person. When I'm in a non-technical team, I tend to be the most technical person. So I kind of have this thing of foot in both camps. And my roots are, maths grads. So my roots are in sort of much more hard mathsy types of problems. I do prefer, if you like, working in the more quantitative teams. It's just that I think to get the really big, interesting challenges in the bank, you need to be able to walk in both camps. You need to be able to do that, but also move on to the selling the ideas and communicating things on.
I mean, I think selling the idea is what separates you from being an analyst or more junior to, making it to be the head of a team, is that no matter how good your technical skills are, honestly, no matter how good they are, you yourself can only do so much, right? But if you can bring a team together and just pull them in the same direction, then you're set, because 10 of you can achieve so much more.
Absolutely. And I guess half of, as you progress through an organization, you spend more and more of your time, like less and less of your time doing the things yourselves and more setting other people up for success. So bringing teams of people that you think work really well together and just letting people have their own like time in the spotlight and demoing the thing and showing the thing, in your stead wherever they can. So yeah, 100%. And I think that's the transition that any data person is going to make into leadership roles where they, it'll be painful, but they'll spend less and less time in the real detail, but more and more time in just working with people and unpicking problems that they have and helping them solve problems and that kind of thing.
It's very true in my career at the moment, actually, because I'm looking for more leadership opportunities because I'm in a pretty special role where I'm just a subject matter expert at the moment, so I report straight into senior management. Nobody reports into me, which is great in the sense that I kind of commit to a workload that is truly just my own, but not so great in the sense that whatever I commit to, whatever strategic decisions I fight for, whatever I agree with my business stakeholders, I have to do the underlying build. So usually the way it works at larger organizations is that if you make managerial level, you'll have some analysts working for you, and then you chat to other managers or senior managers. They have great ideas, and you say, yay, let's do it. Okay, and then you have 5 analysts who do all the underlying work, like extract the data, clean the data, transform the data, and then write some code, build some Tableau dashboards. Now, I do all of this myself as well, which at the moment, I'm getting to the point where I'm getting a bit bored with building these technical solutions, because I'm more interested in going after the high value items, the big ticket items, which is why I actually recently started just, well, educating people on Tableau. And I've been trying to make a change in terms of data culture as well, not just within my team, but hopefully within the wider bank as well. Because I realized that myself, I can only do this much. But if I give other people the skills to build Tableau dashboards, that means I don't have to build them. So I can just be like, yeah, let's do it. And then I can just be like, oh, hey, Stuart, can you build this, please, by Tuesday? And then, it's my problem done, right? I offloaded something that is very much value add to other people because they don't know how to build these things yet. But for me, the value add is really understanding why we're building this dashboard, what insights do we want to get, out of this dashboard, and what are the actionable next steps on the back of this dashboard?
Yeah, absolutely. I was just going to ask you actually, because a lot of the projects I've worked on would use almost a pseudo agile way of working, where you have like a backlog and anyone kind of pick up whatever tasks they want and just move them over. Get to a squad of developers working on the same thing. Have you ever worked in that kind of environment? Because that tends to be a bit more liberal in terms of who does what, and you kind of pick up the things you feel like doing that day and kind of move them across and that kind of thing.
To be honest, I think I have to say not really, because this is my first data and analytics analyst role. Before that, I used to work in investment banking.
Yeah.
It doesn't work in this.
Imagine.
You pick whatever you want. You pick whatever you get assigned in investment banking. And now I work in data management, so it's not one of those roles where these issues can get solved that quick. And I don't specifically work. So within data management, I don't specifically work on lineage, which is where you kind of try and trace your data flows. So say, for example, I said this before, but if Stuart signs up to a banking app, he puts his name in, his address, something, and then those fields should flow through the entire organization. So the next time Stuart wants to sign up with the same name, same email address, you get this notification that, oh, you already signed up. So this is lineage. There's data quality as well. I don't specifically work on these items, which is why I love my role at the moment, because it's so diverse. I actually just go to work and I pick some pretty complex problems. And I would say half the times I succeed, which is not bad actually, because the other half the times when I don't succeed, at least I produce something that people can critique. So a lot of my work failed, but I didn't see it as a failure, because had I not created that piece of work, people wouldn't have had anything to critique. And it's usually the way it works is that people love to speak about things theoretically, especially at large organizations, like, oh yeah, you could do this, you could do that. But when I say I could do this, 2 weeks later or 6 months down the line, I do it, give them something, and then people tell me that it's crap. But then I'm like, okay, good. Just tell me what's wrong with it. And they actually tell me. And, we have a starting point to go off on, because otherwise it's a forever theory, right?
Yeah, no, absolutely. It was just something you said about trying to move out of that sort of delegation type of pattern, because I think what I see is that people tend to, if you unify around a purpose and a sort of like outcome that needs to be delivered, people aren't as bothered about the particular tasks they need to be picking up. And I think if the outcome is just making a Tableau dashboard, then that's almost like you're taking so much out of it, like to, at the start. Whereas if it's actually to present, decision-making tools to this decision-making group to help them decide this better, you can almost think a bit more laterally and say, well, how much of it is a Tableau dashboard? How much of it's insight that goes on top of that? And how much of it is a sort of cadence and way of reviewing the data that we could be pointing at as well? So yeah, I think it's interesting. I mean, I've seen more and more data teams flirt with agile and this kind of interdisciplinary squads type of thing. But at the moment, it tends to be reserved much more for innovation teams, which I think is interesting.
Well, now that I actually think about it, so the data quality team, within my wider team, they run in sprints,
Yeah.
and they have their own agile way of working. I think at the end of the day, all these project management tools, in my opinion, it's just moving whatever sticky notes around a board, right? So as long as
Yeah.
that's the way I think of it. It's
Yeah.
just in an organized way, right?
Yeah.
So
Well, I think it's trying to herd groups of people to work together.
Yeah.
You give them some kind of structure, right? So
Yeah.
it's better. Yeah, anything's better than nothing.
Yeah,
almost.
I feel like with any of these qualifications nowadays, any kind of certifications, and I said this before, the number one thing employers look for is experience, as in relevant industry experience. You can have a master's degree, you can have whatever certifications, but at the end of the day, it's experience that people look for. Say, for example, on my CV or resume at the moment, my education is a one-liner. I have a master's degree from St. Andrews. It's a good university. I mean, it's where the royal family goes in the UK. So you can look it up. It's famous for, I think, two things. It's famous for the royal family and golf.
Yep.
That's it. So you can type it in, St. Andrews. It's a beautiful place on the 30 sunny days in Scotland. So my education is a one-liner now. My graduate scheme, which was my first role, is also a one-liner. And I barely have any certifications on it. It's also a one-liner because I know what employers look for is experience. Now, the question is, if you don't have any experience, how do you get the experience, right? Because that's what most of my viewers also struggle with, is that they want to either start a data career, transition into a data career, but if you have no experience and the job role says you need relevant experience, how do you do it then, right?
Absolutely. I mean, data's almost a catch-22 there, isn't there? So it's, I agree. I think it's starting anywhere, really. I think it's better than nothing. I mean, I think, I don't have a good answer to that, to be honest. To be honest, Mo, I think it's a real challenge right now for getting started, especially in larger organizations. I guess one of the opportunities maybe is to start with smaller organizations then. I think grad schemes are insanely competitive right now, and actually the data ones tend to be vastly oversubscribed. But actually, from what I've seen, every company is in need of more data muscle, and there's a huge demand for skills sets, even when it's not known to be a demand. So, I do see nothing but future growth in this space for people. So hopefully it gives some hope. But I think finding avenues to experience that may be out with a traditional job environment might be one way of doing it. But it's easy to say that. I think generating those opportunities is hard.
It is a hard one. I mean, if I had a magic answer, I'd say it as well. But unfortunately, I don't, which is going to move us on to the next question. Yeah. So the world of data and technology will continue to evolve, probably quite rapidly. So how do you stay abreast of emerging trends and ensure that the bank or whatever team you work in remain at the forefront of innovation within the financial services industry? Yeah,
so I think for a lot of people, the natural start point is to look at what the competitors are doing. But I think for innovation teams, that's almost too late, because people won't share what they're working on. They'll share what they've delivered. Competitors, they don't share the stuff that's in progress. They share the impact and things that have gone live. So if you're looking for that, you're already a whole project timescale behind them. It could be a year, it could be 6 months, it could be 18 months, right? It could be quite far behind the competition. So you need to get much more into sort of, I guess, maybe more non-traditional ways of understanding and keeping close to the radar. I enjoy going to financial services conferences, but find that, again, they tend to lag a little bit, talking about emerging themes. But actually, if you speak to tech, they're much more ahead of the curve. So they give you a sense of lens into what will probably be processed by the financial services sector in 5 years, if that makes sense. So if you want to get ahead of that, I think there's part of it's keeping quite a diverse range of understanding of emerging technology that probably is out with that kind of financial services bank bubble. Yeah.
Do you know of any companies or any tools right now that you think are really interesting and have specific use cases for maybe not just the financial services industry, but wider industries like medtech, health, big ones, supply chain and logistics?
So do you mean just in terms of software packages?
It can be anything interesting you can think of.
I mean, this is quite an obvious one, but I guess what I've seen with things like machine learning is you've moved from writing the codes and calling the functions in Python into many more software packages that don't just build you one ML model, you build you all the ML models within the space of about 20 minutes. You sort of give them the data set, you give them, you sort of coax them as much as you need to, and they'll just run away and generate all the models and a bunch of explained documentation and that kind of thing. And I think this is a really interesting space of sort of augmenting intelligence. It's not automation, because we're not putting anything in yet. We just built a model. It's not quite doing what a human would do. It's a kind of new way of approaching a problem that we can only do with this kind of new technology. So I think that what that's doing is, okay, we can now build loads of models really, really cheaply, in a very short space of time. What new questions can we now ask? So I've always thought even if you're building a data science project the more traditional way, where you've got an intuition about the kind of algorithms you want to use, chuck the same data set into a tool like that, understand what you could have won. If you're doing model validation, similar, understand almost the design and opportunity space there. A classic example is if you built a model more than once, you probably have all these kind of biases as to what fields you think will work the best, and you may not be challenging yourself as much. So again, let some algorithm like that do the crunching for you. Let some software and almost challenge your thinking. So I think that's a really good example of using software like that to almost run parallel to a traditionally run like data science project, data project, just to almost begin to prod at some of the implicit assumptions we make sometimes around which fields will be best, around which model approaches will be best, and just for me having almost like a side-by-side view, because again it's very fast. It doesn't add much time to a project to just run that as a step. I think that's a really interesting area of development for, I guess, traditional modeling in banks.
If you had your ideal team, in terms of technical people, who would be your ideal data analyst, data scientist, and data engineer? I'm not just thinking in terms of technical skills, but what kind of soft skills would they possess? And maybe in this new era of, I guess, artificial intelligence, would you have any other roles like machine learning engineer, or maybe someone who specializes in data ethics, for example?
Yeah, it's a really good question. So I guess with all this stuff, the more you can bring into the team, the better. But at the same time, you don't want to have a data ethicist that's only going to be called on maybe, start of the project, a few times when we're, at sort of key touch points there. So the extent to which they need to be in the team, I think, is a question mark. So I'll kind of go through it. I guess looking at the phases of a project, up front, you want people that understand the business problem to run that kind of discovery phase. So you want the people who can run the workshops to help unpack that. So more you kind of design thinkers, innovators, the people that can really unlock insight from those kind of sessions. And you maybe want to have one or two data SMEs in the room that maybe know where the data is in the organization and can be in that session saying, oh, okay, I maybe know where that is. I can go have a look for that after the call, and maybe even on the side, just see if some of the stuff's available or not. People who can start to visualize the problem, not data viz, but actually just to visualize and conceptualize the problem space. I think it's really important for early stages of a project. And then you get into the whole business casey bit, who can do the really crisp write-up, like there's maybe for traditional project scale, but who can really write down the use case, what we're going to try to do, who can go through all that wonderful governance that the banks need to do, where they ask all the good questions and maybe engage with your data ethicists, your risk people, that kind of thing. And then you need to get into like the harder data skills. You need data engineers to begin to create those data sets, and either data analysts or data scientists, depending on the nature of the problem, people who can source data, but then people who can mine it for either insights or begin to build predictive models around it. So you'd want that covered too. And then you can probably call on some of that project skills to begin to write up that. And, the business people have never left the room, by the way. They're still there. They're talking with the data scientists, what they're finding, data engineers and whatnot. And then just kind of going through, does this make sense? Does this make sense? Kind of iteratively. And then you need the person can talk about, what you've built and write that all up at the end. So I think, does that make sense as a kind of pipeline, thinking it through? I think you need people who can work that discovery phase at the start, but also then people have got the hard skills for development as you get later into the project.
Oh, that sounds like a good data team to
me. Yeah, quite balanced, right? And I think what you find is that people might over-index on one, and I guess it's tricky in organizations that have a sort of center of excellence model, in that you never really leave that team. So you're never in that interdisciplinary squad. So you've always got that kind of draw back into it. And the whole idea is to try to get people like tied into the wider problem as much as possible.
Having worked across multiple organizations of multiple sizes, do you think that the roles and responsibilities of, say, data analysts, data scientists, or data engineers change with the size of the organization? Because what I'm thinking in my head is that for big organizations, if you're a data analyst, you'll be doing data analyst stuff, like extracting insights. Whereas for smaller organizations, I feel like maybe you come in as a data analyst, but you could technically be doing the data engineer and the data science job as well.
Yeah, the risk is the smaller you go, there's less, everyone has to cover more ground generally, right? So the risk is you don't just become the data analyst, you're just the data person. You have all the data things that people don't care about what a job comes after the word data. As an analyst, as an engineer, as a scientist, you're just the data person, and you're almost a one-stop shop for these things. Obviously, as organizations scale, they get into this dance of bundling and unbundling. We centralize this team and we decentralize it, in 2 years' time to figure out which model works best for which sort of discipline. So I think you definitely do see that with scale. There comes that, someone comes in and says, it'd be a good idea if we just brought all the data people together, brought all this people together. So you do tend to see more centers of excellence pop up in larger organizations because you have that economy of scale. And actually, you always want to have the network there. It's really important for data analysts to be talking to each other, but it's how you make sure they stay plugged into the business when you do that, I think, is the crucial piece.
How can you ensure that?
Well,
How do you ensure that in your teams?
Yeah, so with projects that I would run, I would be quite demanding about being really clear, having a little circle with some names in it, so who's working on that project and what percentage of their time we've got on it. Because I think people need to have skin in the game. They can't just be transactionally, I'm just there to do the dashboard, mate, that's all. It needs to be much more, I'm here to help solve the problem. And, I've got data specialisms, but actually I've probably got perspectives on everything if we go through it.
Actually, on this note, how do you ensure that people who do the technical bits also have an understanding of the bigger goal? Because I feel like sometimes if you're more junior and, you do all the, I would say, boring, repetitive stuff, like crunching code, cleaning data, sometimes you lose sight of the end goal, which is something way bigger. How do you ensure to keep these people on track and make them understand what you as a team are working towards too?
Yeah, so I think this happens more in larger organizations because they can afford it. But, you want to make the build, measure, learn loop as small as possible with some of this stuff. And the idea that we've got 3 months to deliver something and then we'll see if people like it, which, that's not tenable in a small organization. You need to have a prototype up and running in a week or whatnot to sort of really, keep people engaged. So I think there's a piece there where if you can work on a kind of like, start with a prototype, start with an MVP and build out from there into something that people can see is quite tangible, bring them on a journey. I think that's really important rather than it just being, okay, we've got the requirements, we're going to disappear into a room for 6 months and we'll come out with something. You might like it, you might not. So I think, the shorter your loop can be, the better.
Okay, so the next question, this is an interesting one. I'm looking forward to your answers on this one. So being the head of innovation, you've probably come across some or many unique and quirky ideas. What are the most unconventional innovation pitches you've ever received? And did they end up being a hidden gem or a wild ride?
Such a good question, right? So my answer is going to almost invert this a little bit, but I should say first, I do collect a list of all the things I wish I could have gone for, but I didn't feel like the organization was there, or I pitched them in the organization and, didn't work. We tried and flirted with things like, more interactive AI things when it was probably too early before this whole generative AI boom. So that's probably not as quirky anymore. But one thing I remember that's still on my regret list is there's this little company that basically brings in, works with 16 to 18-year-olds and developing their entrepreneurial skills. And they almost act as like a consultancy service for projects in large organizations. And I love this as an idea because you get completely fresh perspectives. And actually just pitching that was really tough in the organization I was working with. It wasn't the right time for whatever reason. But actually, as a concept, I love that idea of, not just building for, the stakeholders there, but actually the customers of the future. And, what better perspectives and the kind of honesty and open eyes that you're going to get with sort of teenagers who are developing those kind of skills. I love that as an idea. But you know what? The question makes me reflect that actually, I've not been pitched anything that was just so wild that I said, this is too crazy. It tends to be the opposite. It tends to be people said, we need, we jump straight to a solution, we need this. And it's almost the other way, where I tend to walk away with things that were just a bit too boring or a bit too simple or incremental because, if you're meant to be an innovation team, you can't be, automating spreadsheets and that kind of thing.
Are there any ideas that people have pitched to you or you've come across, say, a decade ago that you have seen being implemented over the last decade?
Well, so I worked with someone who was a real specialist in something called agent-based modeling. So this is where you essentially build loads of models that kind of interact with each other, and then you look at emergent behavior. And that's something that's being revisited now with interactive AI. So basically that interactive AI almost provides a nice atom for that whole matrix to sort of build out and look at how these things interact with each other and develop really complex systems. So it's had a bit of a renaissance. But that was, maybe sort of 6-7 years ago. I think I was working with a guy helping with a pitch for that in a big bank.
In a world where your job title is a superhero name, what would it be, and what extraordinary power would you possess in the realm of financial innovation
Yeah,
specifically?
I love this question because I should have a good answer having innovation in the job title and all that stuff. But the first thing I did was ask ChatGPT, which gave me a rubbish answer. Innovation dynamo, it said, and I got it to do an image, but it wasn't that. I guess I really like those superheroes that have kind of meta powers that can like take other people's powers or give other people's powers. And I think something in that vein where I can get the best out of people that have skills and get them working together, I think is a really useful one. The networker, I'll go for something like that, where it's
Oh, I
really
like
about providing networks. You can imagine the logo would be a bunch of, like
networker.
joined circles or something. Not really figured out the mechanics of the superpower, but I think it would be about getting the best superpowers out of other people.
No, I like that. The networker. It sounds a bit menacing as
Yeah.
well. I do like
Is he
that
good?
a
Is he
lot.
evil? Who knows?
I do like that. Well, I guess looking forwards in your career,
Yeah.
right? So you've worked with data your entire career. You've been in innovation for quite a long time
Yeah,
now.
5-6 years.
What do you think are the next steps for you, say, within the next 5 years in terms of both in terms of what you want to do and what kind of teams you want to head up? Do you want to switch industries? Do you want to dive into something new?
Yeah, it's a really good question. So at the moment, I am so interested in where we are with artificial intelligence and that intersection with behavioral science. And I'm really exploring that space at the moment. Professionally, I think I'm most interested in making an impact and, showing that I'm adding value and solving real problems. So I think anything really that combines them. I love the idea of jumping sectors. Financial services I've enjoyed working there for a long time. It'd be great to start again and have to learn a whole bunch of new jargon in another field. I'd love to explore the world as well. But it's whether or not I've got the risk appetite for a complete immersion in a completely different field. I'll need to figure that out.
Because I know that you've lived in Japan
Yes.
before.
Yeah.
Do you want to tell us something about Japan? Because I've always been fascinated with Japanese culture, and I do absolutely love sushi. And apparently, according to Stuart, he said this to me a couple years ago, but the sushi you get in Europe is nowhere near as good as any corner shop in Japan.
Yeah. I mean, it's directionally it's getting better over here, but yeah, just remembering the conveyor belt sushi place around the corner from my apartment in Japan, it was just nothing like it that I've come across in the UK. I don't want to come across as a sushi snob, but yeah, no, I worked there. I did a sort of English teaching program for a couple of years, then got one of those same pay but more responsibility type of promotions to work in sort of local government office and sort of helping out people in a similar boat to me for the last year. But that was one of the best experiences for me there, working in, I guess, local government essentially in Japan in a sort of city called Sendai. And I guess one of the things I've connected there is that people have this impression that, Japan's really like bureaucratic and really hard to make decisions, but to be honest, it's about the same as banks over here. I think that's one takeaway I guess I'll give you.
Do you speak any Japanese?
I do. Please don't put me on the spot, but yeah, no, I did a Japanese proficiency test when I was out there that technically means I'm advanced, but it's been a while. Where at the moment my eldest daughter is killing it on Duolingo.
Oh,
and she's really coming on, so it's great to have an opportunity to speak to somebody in the house.
I think we're good to wrap this up basically. So I thought for some closing thoughts, I just wanted to really have a conversation with you around, I guess, your entire career. So reflecting on your career specifically with regards to working with data, what do you think you did really well? What do you think are areas you could have improved upon? Maybe some lessons, some big lessons and life learnings that we can take away that we could do better?
Yeah, so I think in terms of one of the things I think I did well early was kind of, I'm not sure if this came from laziness or like conscientiousness, but I didn't like doing the same thing twice. So if ever I had a spreadsheet with a manual process attached, it would be kind of automated the next time I did it. So there's this thing about, end up sort of doing yourself out of a job over and over again, if that makes sense. So you make your job as streamlined as possible. And then so it's in a good spot for someone to sort of pick it up down the line. Like that, looking back, it's quite natural to end up in sort of more project-oriented work because you're essentially treating even a regular task as almost a project in itself. So I think that was something I did really well, where I would just sort of fix things as I went, just make things a little better. I wish I'd invested a bit more on like a wider range of harder skills early to support me doing that. Like I'm looking at things that, I became insanely good at Excel because that was tend to be what I used. But actually, if I'd learned I don't know, I could do a bit of Python, but if I learned like say other coding languages or other sort of things that could have given me a wider toolkit, I'd have liked to have done that earlier. I think what I've done well is obviously keeping the stall sharp and really upskilling on new things as they come up. So behavioral science is one, but things like artificial intelligence and machine learning is another. But I guess the feedback I tend to get is like, especially early on, is that I didn't have enough confidence to like, toot my own horn or self-promote. And I think, a lot of the talk about imposter syndrome really resonates with me. So I think I probably was quite slow in my early days of my career, purely from a self-confidence type of perspective, which is obviously a really hard thing to wave a magic wand and do anything about. And but I'm very content with the progress I've made and that kind of thing. But it's when you have your younger self, it's almost like believe in yourself a bit more. You're doing well here. You're a developing picture. Keep on improving, and you're on the right track, type of thing.
Anything that has helped you particularly with imposter syndrome?
Talking about it, I think, really helps. So I think I think the feelings are feelings, right? They're information your body is giving you. I think it helps keep you really sharp. I tend to beat myself. It's like almost like a weird loss aversion thing where I beat myself up much more about bad experiences I have or things that didn't go well than I do pat myself on the back for things that do go well. But I think having your people that champion you and people that get you and are in with your experience for the longer term, I think is super helpful. Because I think they give you this perspective on yourself, like, are you doing yourself as a service here? Because that didn't go well, but yeah, that did, and that I think really, really helps. So I think this isn't just about a friend group; it's actually about people that will call it out when it doesn't go well, but actually, remind you when it does.
I mean, I think it's okay to not know things, right? Like this is what people have to realize, especially if you're starting out as well. So many of you guys come to me and you say you struggle with imposter syndrome, but within the world of data and within the world of tech, it's not the fact that you have to know everything. It's about continuously learning. There's always going to be something new. It's just like there's always going to be smarter people than you. Like no matter how smart you are, there's 7 billion, maybe 8 billion people in the world now. There's going to be someone out there who knows a bit more about this than you. And you just have to accept that fact and be okay with it, right? Yeah,
there's definitely something about appreciating where you are in that kind of world order. But also, I mean, there's so many different paths for knowledge, and you can improve yourself in all kinds of different ways. And I think people talk about the T-shaped employee, where you develop a deep specialism in a kind of general sense. But you can, what I find is actually going shallower on a wider range of things actually does you really well as well. And there's no one correct journey. So you're right that you may always find someone who can code in R better than you can, but actually you can do that and you can apply it to the subject area in a way that no one else has, and joining things together in a way that no one else has. So, going interdisciplinary and recognizing that, you can grow in more than one direction, I think is one way of looking at it too.
If you were a starting data analyst right now, what skills, both in terms of technical skills and analytical skills, would you learn right now?
Sure. I mean, I think having a really good grounding in like statistics is super important. So I start with theory. I'd absolutely start with that. I think experiment design is almost like, again, having a bit of a renaissance design and really understanding what makes a good A/B test, really understanding what makes a well-designed, well-structured ethical experiment these days is super important. Some of the stuff around process. So actually, I think things like design thinking and so on apply really well to data science. And these are kind of like almost like peripheral soft skills. And then you need to pick whatever it is, probably the organization you're going to be working for, that's the sort of tech software type skills, coding skills you're going to need to operate in their environment. So there's a lot of systems that I've only ever seen really used in credit risk, but you can't not use them. So there's things like that that are very niche cases. But I think some of those things are really good general skills to build up your understanding of.
So I think what we can take away from Stuart's answer, and what stands out to me at least, is the fact that you need to be able to apply your knowledge, and it's not just about the technical skills. So I've said this many times before, but what separates, say, for example, a good data scientist from a great data scientist is not going to be their ability to code stuff in Python. It's going to be their ability to understand the probability, the math, and the statistics behind it. Because the best data scientists I've seen in my life, they're first and foremost scientists.
Yeah.
And secondly, they learned to code because they weren't able to do what they wanted to do in their heads or, writing it down. So they had to learn to code to be able to carry out what's in their head. But it's that knowledge of statistics and understanding matrices and vectors and econometrics, all the things that killed me during my master's degree. That's the hard bit.
I completely agree. I think as well, they're evergreen, right? They're not going to go anywhere, some of those skills. It doesn't really matter if your company decides to re-platform, use a different coding language. That theory is not going anywhere. You can still use that. The other piece I was going to say there is the bit about science, being a scientist is like so often forgotten, because scientists start from a position of not knowing anything, right? And they have a hypothesis, they have a thought, which may or may not be true, that they then test. And actually that as a discipline can really unify teams and organizations, because it's not about we're doing this because it's the best answer. It's this is our hypothesis, we're going to try it. These are our success criteria, we're going to see if they work. So I think that in itself is it's quite modern thinking, I think, that can be applied in a corporate context, but I think it's a really powerful one for kind of bringing teams together around a purpose.
All right, so I think we touched on artificial intelligence, or AI, and I do have a question for Stuart, because this is something I've been wondering about myself, whether or not it's still worth it to learn any technical skills with Gen AI coming in and producing everything for you. So say, for example, the way I see it now is that the barrier to entry to coding, to producing dashboards, to writing SQL queries has been significantly lowered, because you could literally just ask a chatbot and it would produce something for you. So the way I see the industry going forward is that I think you'll have to learn to use these tools to make yourself more effective and then fine tune some answers. But what do you think about it?
Yeah, so it's a really good question, because this is what the industry is having this moment around. Are we talking about automation, right? Can you replace things? Are we talking about kind of do the same stuff now, but you got a little AI assistant? Or is it more in that augmentation space where you can use these tools to ask questions you just couldn't before? I think that you need to understand how these things work to use them, particularly with generative AI. I think going at it from a risk perspective, any app or anything you build that's based on generative AI is going to need like kind of red teaming. It's going to need people to like attack that in a way that you just don't have to do with other propositions and things. And technology is super immature now, so I think it'd be really difficult to guess about that. I think with things like machine learning, you're spot on that it's almost trivial now to build a model. So that probably upweights skills like data engineering, data sourcing, metadata understanding, lineage, because who's going to get good data, ethical data that we can legally use for these like models that can just chew on anything, or sorry, algorithms that can chew on anything and produce the models for you. So I think that the tech's getting more complicated. It's going to raise the stakes for really understanding how it works. Not to the nth degree. You don't necessarily need to know how the algorithms work, like a deep level, but you do need to have appreciation of why they work and the kind of context they're useful for, and also how to test them. So I think things like that are never really going to go away, but it will make the skills that go around it much more important. So I think all was just mentioned, as well as the translation one you mentioned earlier.
So it's just the fact that skills and tech are changing, and it's completely normal that your job roles and responsibilities will change as well, right?
Absolutely. I mean, it's like, I worked, Will worked with people that worked before email came in, and these things happen. They completely turn everything on its head over, a period of time. You almost don't notice it happening, because it's quite, it tends to be people always overestimate the short-term impacts of this stuff and underestimate the long-term impacts. So I think it's going to be like that kind of boiling a frog type of thing, where we're already seeing seeds of this stuff everywhere. I think the crucial thing is don't bury your head in the sand. Just be testing this stuff, almost shoehorning it in wherever you can. We had this thing in a previous team where we thought of AI as an extra team member, and we quite often think of, can we get our AI intern to have a look at this, just as a discipline. It's like think about just understand the limits of what it's useful for, what it's not.
Oh, I like that, AI as an extra team member. To be honest, that's the way I view AI right now, or ChatGPT specifically, because to be honest, it's just a faster way to Google things for me now, because it explains the code, it gives me examples, it's quick to prompt as well. But one of my pet peeves was when ChatGPT was first released back in November 2022, the amount of questions I got asked around how my job would become obsolete, as in, will data analysts have a job, or data scientists or data engineers? But I think people came down really hard on data analysts specifically, and I really do not understand why. So first of all, I think what ChatGPT can do is, I would say it's more relatable to data scientists, like machine learning models. Data engineering, essentially writing some pipelines, ChatGPT will produce code. Because the way I see my job as a data analyst, the biggest value add from me is solving business critical problems. So I connect business and data, I find what the problem is, and then I go and solve that. Now, ChatGPT, I'm not too sure how it's going to solve these problems, because you need to speak to SMEs and all of that. But that aside, I think The other thing for me is just the fact that imagine the jobs that existed 50 years ago. They don't exist now. So how can you expect the jobs that exist nowadays to still exist in 50 years' time? Take, for example, something really simple, the self-checkout at grocery stores. 30 years ago, if you tell someone that that's going to be a thing, they'll be like, you're insane, right? Completely insane. Whereas now everybody uses self-checkout. So I just think it's completely normal that as the world evolves and as tech changes, you need to evolve as well. And that's why those questions that, oh God, initially they were just like, you're not going to have a job. I'm like, I'm sure I'll have a job, because the way I think about it is that who would I rather hire? Someone with deep data expertise who can also code and do the technical bits and use artificial intelligence tools on the side, or the person who has no clue about data, pipelines, data management, lineage, data quality, but can prompt some AI tools? Surely I'll just hire the person who already has skills.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I think ChatGPT, where it is today, people are using it as a bit of a hacky solution for just general efficiency, right? It's not really in, sort of like work packages or pipelines seriously here. There's maybe a very small number of serious applications that use it. But people are actually extracting value at an individual level with it. So I think if you're not on that train, you're missing out, right? You're making your life a little bit harder than it needs to be. And it's a good analogy to use email, right? How would you feel if email had been out for a couple of years and people were just resolutely not engaging with it? I mean, there will have been holdouts for that kind of thing, but these things just make your life a bit easier. Or even if they don't, have a go and see. Just like be a scientist with it and see what works for you and what doesn't. Yeah.
I think of ChatGPT as just a way to bring something really complicated to the general public, because I think what Sam Altman did really well is that he's an amazing salesman. That's it. At the end of the day, if you look at the best companies in the world, the most valuable ones, they're usually led by someone who's probably overambitious, overconfident, and is really good at selling. So WeWork is another example. This guy, Adam Neumann, he made us believe that WeWork is a tech company.
Yeah.
Whereas essentially it was just office leasing, right? And then he walked away. I think I actually saw this video the other day. So after he destroyed the valuation of WeWork, the day before they IPO'd, he sold $700 million worth of stocks, and they made him redundant. So they paid him $1 billion for him not to be the CEO. So basically he walked away with almost $2 billion, and WeWork is in ruins. So yeah, that's what I think of ChatGPT. I think it's just a very commercial platform at the moment. I think there's a ChatGPT store as well, maybe. And I think that's it. Like, people just jumped on this bandwagon.
Yeah, I think you're right back to herding again, aren't you? So it's like we're just these little creatures that like to follow confident people that stand up and get airtime on our TVs and speak with confidence about the future. We like to follow that. We see everyone else jumping onto the bandwagon with different technology, and we're like, I don't want to be left out here. So what's the right place for me to get on? So it's an interesting that it sort of comes back to behavior again.
But before we turn this whole podcast into a ChatGPT conversation, I think we're hitting the end of the podcast. So maybe some closing thoughts, Stuart, just on how to build a successful career working with data. If you have some top tips or any of your top experiences that you can reflect on that you want our audience to walk away.
Yeah, so I guess focus on soft skills, be constantly pushing the envelope in terms of the number of strings in your bow and what you're looking to do. Be like aggressive in building your network and people that are going to look after you and shout like root for you from the sidelines. And don't put your head in the sand with any new themes. Like take some time and get stuck in, have a go. If it's not for you, it's not for you, but at least you've tried. And that would be it for me.
Well, thank you so much for being here today. I hope you enjoyed it. And maybe we'll see you next time. Who knows?
Yeah, appreciate it. Thank you so much, Mo. This was so much fun.
Thank you so much for being here. Thank you.